The Smallest Dragonboy by Anne McCaffrey. Although Kevin lengthened his walking stride as far as his legs would stretch, he couldn't quite keep up with the other candidates. He knew he would be teased again. Just as he knew many other things that his foster mother told him he ought not to know, Kevin knew that Betterly, the most senior of the boys, set that spanking pace just to embarrass him, the smallest dragon boy. Kevin would arrive, tail fork end of the group, breathless, chest heaving, and maybe get a stern look from the instructing wing second. Dragon riders, even if they were still only hopeful candidates for the glowing eggs which were hardening on the hot sands of the hatching ground cavern, were expected to be punctual and prepared. Sloth was not tolerated by the were leader of Bendon Ware. A good record was especially important now. It was very near hatching time, when the baby dragons would crack their mottled shells and stagger forth to choose their lifetime companions. The very thought of that glorious moment made Kevin's breath catch in his throat. To be chosen, to be a dragon rider, to sit astride the neck of a winged beast with jeweled eyes, to be his friend, in telepathic communion with him for life, to be his companion in good times and fighting extremes, to fly effortlessly over the lands of Pern, or thrillingly, between, to any point anywhere on the world. Flying between was done on dragonback, or not at all, and it was dangerous. Kevin glanced upward, past the black mouths of the were caves, in which grown dragons and their chosen riders lived, toward the star stones that crowned the ridge of the old volcano that was Bendon Ware. On the height, the blue watch dragon, his rider mounted on his neck, stretched the great transparent pinions that carried him on the winds of Pern to fight the evil thread that fell at certain times from the skies. The many-faceted rainbow jewels of his eyes glistened fleetingly in the greeny sun. He folded his great wings to his back, and the watch pair resumed their statue-like pose of alertness. Then the enticing view was obscured as Kevin passed into the hatching ground cavern. The sands underfoot were hot, even through heavy ware-hide boots. How the bootmaker had protested having to sew so small. Kevin was forced to wonder why being small was reprehensible. People were always calling him babe and shooing him away as being too small or too young for this or that. Kevin was constantly working, twice as hard as any other boy his age, to prove himself capable. What if his muscles weren't as big as Betterly's? They were just as hard. And if he couldn't overpower anyone in a wrestling match, he could outdistance everyone in a foot race. Maybe if you run fast enough, Betterly had jeered on the occasion when Kevin had been goaded to boast of his swiftness. You could catch a dragon. That's the only way you'll make a dragon rider. You just wait and see, Betterly. You just wait, Kevin had replied. He would have liked to wipe the contemptuous smile from Betterly's face, but the guy didn't fight fair, even when a winged second was watching. No one knows what impresses a dragon. They've got to be able to find you first, babe. Yes, being the smallest candidate was not an enviable position. It was therefore imperative that Kevin impress a dragon in his first hatching. That would wipe the smile off every face in the cavern and accord him the respect due any dragon rider, even the smallest one. Besides, no one knew exactly what impressed the baby dragons as they struggled from their shells in search of their lifetime partners. I like to believe the dragons see into a man's heart, Kevin's foster mother Mendy told him. If they find goodness, honesty, a flexible mind, patience, courage, and you've got that in quantity, dear Kevin, that's what dragons look for. I've seen many a well-grown lad left standing on the sands hatching day in favor of someone not so strong or tall or handsome. And if my memory serves me, which it usually did, Mendy knew every word of every Harper's tale worth telling, although Kevin did not interrupt her to say so. "I don't believe that Flar, our were leader, was all that tall when Bronze Nementh chose him, and Nementh was the only bronze dragon of that hatching." Dreams of impressing a bronze were beyond Kevin's boldest reflections, although that goal dominated the thoughts of every other hopeful candidate. Green dragons were small and fast and more numerous. There was more prestige to impressing a blue or brown than a green. Being practical, Kevin seldom dreamed as high as a big fighting brown, like Canth, Fenor's fine fellow, the biggest brown on all Pern. But to fly a bronze? Bronzes were almost as big as the queen, and only they took the air when a queen flew at mating time. A bronze rider could aspire to become were leader. Well, Kevin would console himself, brown riders could aspire to become wing seconds, and that wasn't bad. He'd even settle for a green dragon. They were small, but so was he. No matter, he simply had to impress a dragon his first time in the hatching ground. Then no one in the were would taunt him any more for being so small. Shells, Kevin thought now, but the sands are hot. "Impression time is imminent, candidates," the wing second was saying, as everyone crowded respectfully close to him. "See the extent of the striations on this promising egg?" The stretch marks were larger than yesterday. Everyone leaned forward and nodded thoughtfully. That particular egg was the one Betterly had marked as his own, and no other candidate dared, on pain of being beaten by Betterly at his first opportunity, to approach it. The egg was marked by a large yellowish splotch in the shape of a dragon back-winging to land, talons outstretched to grasp rock. Everyone knew that bronze eggs bore distinctive markings, and naturally Betterly, who'd been presented at 8 impressions already and was the biggest of the candidates, had chosen it. "I'd say that the great opening day is almost upon us," the wing second went on, and then his face assumed a grave expression. "As we well know, there are only 40 eggs and 72 candidates. Some of you may be disappointed on the great day. That doesn't necessarily mean you aren't dragon rider material, just that the dragon for you hasn't been shelled. You'll have other hatchings, and it's no disgrace to be left behind an impression or two, or more." Kevin was positive that the wing second's eyes rested on Betterly, who'd been stood off at so many impressions already. Kevin tried to squinch down so the wing second wouldn't notice him. Kevin had been reminded too often that he was eligible to be a candidate by one day only. He, of all the hopefuls, was most likely to be left standing on the great day. One more reason why he simply had to impress at his first hatching. "Now move about among the eggs," the wing second said. "Touch them. We don't know that it does any good, but it certainly doesn't do any harm." Some of the boys laughed nervously, but everyone immediately began to circulate among the eggs. Betterly stepped up officiously to his egg, daring anyone to come near it. Kevin smiled, because he had already touched it. Every inspection day, when the others were leaving the hatching ground and no one could see him crouch to stroke it. Kevin had an egg he concentrated on too, one drawn slightly to the far side of the others. The shell had a soft, greenish-blue tinge with a faint, creamy swirl design. The consensus was that this egg contained a mere green, so Kevin was rarely bothered by rivals. He was somewhat perturbed, then, to see Betterly wandering over to him. "I don't know why you're allowed in this impression, Kevin. There are enough of us without a babe," Betterly said, shaking his head. "I'm of age." Kevin kept his voice level, telling himself not to be bothered by mere words. "Yeah." Betterly made a show of standing on his toe tips. "You can't even see over an egg. Hatching day, you better get in front or the dragons won't see you at all. Course you could get run down that way in the mad scramble. Oh, I forget. You can run fast, can't you?" "You better make sure a dragon sees you this time, Betterly," Kevin replied. "You're almost over age, aren't you?" Betterly flushed and took a step forward, hand half raised. Kevin stood his ground, but if Betterly advanced one more step, he would call the wing second. No one fought on the hatching ground. Surely Betterly knew that much. Fortunately, at that moment, the wing second called the boys together and led them from the hatching ground to start on evening chores. There were glows to be replenished in the main kitchen caverns and sleeping cubicles, the major hallways, and the Queen's apartment. Firestone sacks had to be filled against thread attack, and black rock brought to the kitchen hearths. The boys fell to their chores, tantalized by the odors of roasting meat. The population of the Weir began to assemble for the evening meal, and the dragon riders came in from the feeding ground on their sweep checks. It was the time of day Kevin liked best. Once the chores were done, but before dinner was served, a fellow could often get close enough to the dragon riders to hear their talk. Tonight, Kevin father, Clast, was at the main dragon rider table. It puzzled Kevin how his father, a brown rider and a tall man, could be his father, because he, Kevin, was so small. It obviously puzzled Clast, too, when he deigned to notice his small son. "In a few more turns you'll be as tall as I am, or taller." Clast was pouring Bendon wine all around the table. The dragon riders were relaxing. There'd be no threat attack for 3 more days, and they'd be in the mood to tell tall tales, better than Harper yarns about impossible maneuvers they'd done a dragonback. When threat attack was closer, their talk would change to a discussion of tactics of evasion, of going between, how long to suspend there, until the burning but fragile thread would freeze and crack and fall harmlessly off dragon and man. They would dispute the exact moment to feed firestone to the dragon, so he'd have the best flame ready to sear thread mid-air and render it harmless to ground and man below. There was such a lot to know and understand about being a dragon rider that sometimes Kevin was overwhelmed. How would he ever be able to remember everything he ought to know at the right moment? He couldn't dare ask such a question. This would only have given additional weight to the notion that he was too young yet to be a dragon rider. "Having older candidates makes good sense," Lavelle was saying as Kevin settled down near the table. "Why waste 4 to 5 years of a dragon's fighting prime until his rider grows up enough to stand the rigors?" Lavelle had impressed a blue of Ramoth's first clutch. Most of the candidates thought Lavelle was marvelous, because he spoke up in front of the older riders, who awed them. That was well enough in the interval, when you didn't need to mount the full Weir complement to fight thread. But not now. Not with more eligible candidates than ever. Let the babes wait. "Any boy who's over 12 turns has the right to stand in the hatching ground," Clast replied, a slight smile on his face. He never argued or got angry. Kevin wished he were more like his father. And oh, how he wished he were a brown rider. "Only a dragon, each particular dragon, knows what he wants in a rider. We certainly can't tell. Time and again, the theorists," Clast's smile deepened as his eyes swept those at the table, "are surprised by dragon choice. They never seem to make mistakes, however." "Now, Clast, just look at the roster this impression. 72 boys and only 40 eggs. Drop off the 12 youngest, and there's still a good field for the hatchlings to choose from. Shells. There are a couple of werelings unable to see over a were egg, much less a dragon. And years before they can ride thread." "True enough, but the were is scarcely under fighting strength, and if the youngest impress, they'll be old enough to fight when the oldest of our current dragons go between from senility." "Half the were-bred lads have already been through several impressions," one of the bronze riders said then. "I'd say drop some of them off this time. Give the untried a chance." "There's nothing wrong in presenting a clutch with as wide a choice as possible," said the were-leader, who had joined the table with Lessa, the were-woman. "Has there ever been a case," she said, smiling in her odd way at the riders, "where a hatchling didn't choose?" Her suggestion was almost heretical, and drew astonished gasps from everyone, including the boys. Flair laughed. "You say the most outrageous things, Lessa." "Well, has there ever been a case where a dragon didn't choose?" "Can't say as I recall one," Clast replied. "Then we continue in this tradition," Lessa said firmly, as if that ended the matter. But it didn't. The argument ranged from one table to the other all through dinner, with some favoring a weeding out of the candidates to the most likely, lopping off those who were very young or who had had multiple opportunities to impress. All the candidates were in a swivet, though such a departure from tradition would be to the advantage of many. As the evening progressed, more riders were favoring eliminating the youngest and those who'd passed 4 or more impressions unchosen. Kevin felt he could bear such a dictum only if Betterly were also eliminated. But this seemed less likely than that Kevin would be turfed out, since the wear's need was for fighting dragons and riders. By the time the evening meal was over, no decision had been reached, although the wear leader had promised to give the matter due consideration. He might have slept on the problem, but few of the candidates did. Tempers were uncertain in the sleeping caverns next morning, as the boys were routed out of their beds to carry water and black rock and cover the glows. Twice Mende had to call Kevin to order for clumsiness. "Whatever is the matter with you, boy?" she demanded in exasperation, when he tipped black rock short of the bin and sooted up the hearth. "They're going to keep me from this impression." "What?" Mende stared at him. "Who?" "You heard them talking at dinner last night. They're going to turf the babes from the hatching." Mende regarded him a moment longer before touching his arm gently. "There's lots of talk around a supper table, Kevin, and it cools as soon as the supper. I've heard the same nonsense before every hatching, but nothing has ever changed." "There's always a first time," Kevin answered, copying one of her own phrases. "That'll be enough of that, Kevin. Finish your job. If the clutch does hatch today, we'll need full rock bins for the feast, and you won't be around to do the filling. All my fosterlings make dragon riders." "The first time?" Kevin was bold enough to ask as he scooted off with the rock barrow. Perhaps, Kevin thought later, if he hadn't been on that chore just when Betterly was also fetching black rock, things might have turned out differently. But he had dutifully trundled the barrow to the outdoor bunker for another load just as Betterly arrived on a similar errand. "Heard the news, babe?" Betterly asked. He was grinning from ear to ear, and he put an unnecessary emphasis on the final insulting word. "The eggs are cracking?" Kevin all but dropped the loaded shovel. Several anxieties flicked through his mind then. He was black with rock dust. Would he have time to wash before donning the white tunic of candidacy? And if the eggs were hatching, why hadn't the candidates been recalled by the winged second? "Nah, guess again." Betterly was much too pleased with himself. With a sinking heart, Kevin knew what the news must be, and he could only stare with intense desolation at the older boy. "Come on, guess, babe." "I've no time for guessing games," Kevin managed to say with indifference. He began to shovel black rock into the barrow as fast as he could. "I said guess." Betterly grabbed the shovel. "And I said I have no time for guessing games." Betterly wrenched the shovel from Kevin's hands. "Guess!" "I'll have that shovel back, Betterly." Kevin straightened up, but he didn't come to Betterly's bulky shoulder. From somewhere, other boys appeared, some with barrows, some mysteriously alerted to the prospect of a confrontation among their numbers. "Babes don't give orders to candidates around here, babe." Someone sniggered, and Kevin, incredulous, knew that he must have been dropped from the candidacy. He yanked the shovel from Betterly's loosened grasp. Snarling, the older boy tried to regain possession, but Kevin clung with all his strength to the handle, dragged back and forth as the stronger boy jerked the shovel about. With a sudden, unexpected movement, Betterly rammed the handle into Kevin's chest, knocking him over the barrow handles. Kevin felt a sharp, painful jab behind his left ear, an unbearable pain in his left shin, and then a painless nothingness. Mende's angry voice roused him, and startled, he tried to throw back the covers, thinking he'd overslept. But he couldn't move, so firmly was he tucked into his bed. And then the constriction of a bandage on his head and the dull sickishness in his leg brought back recent occurrences. "Hatching?" he cried. "No, lovey," Mendy said in a kind voice. Her hand was cool and gentle on his forehead. "Though there's some as won't be at any hatching again." Her voice took on a stern edge. Kevin looked beyond her to see the werewoman, who was frowning with irritation. "Kevin, will you tell me what occurred at the Black Rock bunker?" asked Lessa in an even voice. He remembered Betterly now, and the quarrel over the shovel, and what had Mendy said about some not being at any hatching? Much as he hated Betterly, he couldn't bring himself to tattle on Betterly and force him out of candidacy. "Come, lad," and a note of impatience crept into the werewoman's voice. "I merely want to know what happened from you, too. Mendy said she sent you for Black Rock. Betterly, and every wereling in the cavern, seems to have been on the same errand. What happened?" "Betterly took my shovel. I hadn't finished with it." "There's more than one shovel. What did he say to you?" "He'd heard the news." "What news?" The werewoman was suddenly amused. That there'd been changes." "Is that what he said?" "Not exactly." "What did he say? Come on, lad, I've heard from everyone else, you know." He said for me to guess the news." "And you fell for that old gag?" The werewoman's irritation returned. "Consider all the talk last night at supper, Lessa," Mendy said. "Of course the boy would think he'd been eliminated." "In effect, he is, with a broken skull and leg." Lessa touched his arm in a rare gesture of sympathy. "Be that as it may, Kevin, you'll have other impressions. Betterly will not. There are certain rules that must be observed by all candidates, and his conduct proves him unacceptable to the were." She smiled at Mendy and then left. "I'm still a candidate?" Kevin asked urgently. "Well, you are and you aren't, lovey," his foster mother said. "Is the numbweed working?" she asked, and when he nodded, she said, "You just rest. I'll bring you some nice broth." At any other time in his life, Kevin would have relished such cosseting, but now he just lay there worrying. Betterly had been dismissed. Would the others think it was his fault? But everyone was there. Betterly provoked that fight. His worry increased, because although he heard excited comings and goings in the passageway, no one tweaked back the curtain across the sleeping alcove he shared with 5 other boys. Surely one of them would have to come in some time. No, they were all avoiding him, and something else was wrong, only he didn't know what. Mendy returned with broth and beechberry bread. "Why doesn't anyone come see me, Mendy? I haven't done anything wrong, have I? I didn't ask to have Betterly turfed out." Mendy soothed him, saying everyone was busy with noontime chores and no one was angry with him. They were giving him a chance to rest in quiet. The numbweed made him drowsy, and her words were fair enough. He permitted his fears to dissipate, until he heard a hum. Actually, he felt it first, in the broken shin bone and his sore head. The hum began to grow. 2 things registered suddenly in Kevin's groggy mind. The only white candidate's robe still on the pegs in the chamber was his, and the dragons hummed when a clutch was being laid or being hatched. Impression, and he was flat abed. Bitter, bitter disappointment turned the warm broth sour in his belly. Even the small voice telling him that he'd have other opportunities failed to alleviate his crushing depression. This was the impression that mattered. This was his chance to show everyone, from Mendy to Class to Lavelle, and even the were leader, that he, Kevin, was worthy of being a dragon rider. He twisted in bed, fighting against the tears that threatened to choke him. Dragon men don't cry. Dragon men learn to live with pain. Pain? The leg didn't actually pain him as he rolled about on his bedding. His head felt sort of stiff from the tightness of the bandage. He sat up, an effort in itself since the numbweed made exertion difficult. He touched the splintered leg. The knee was unhampered. He had no feeling in his bone, really. He swung himself carefully to the side of his bed and stood slowly. The room wanted to swim about him. He closed his eyes, which made the dizziness worse, and he had to clutch the wall. Gingerly, he took a step. The broken leg dragged. It hurt in spite of the numb weed, but what was pain to a dragon man? No one had said he couldn't go to the impression. "You are and you aren't," were Mende's exact words. Clinging to the wall, he jerked off his bedshirt. Stretching his arm to the utmost, he jerked his white candidate's tunic from the peg. Jamming first one arm and then the other into the holes, he pulled it over his head. Too bad about the belt. He couldn't wait. He hobbled to the door, hung on to the curtain to steady himself. The weight on his leg was unwieldy. He wouldn't get very far without something to lean on. Down by the bathing pool was one of the long crook-necked poles used to retrieve clothes from the hot washing troughs. But it was down there, and he was on the level above, and there was no one nearby to come to his aid. Everyone would be in the hatching ground right now, eagerly waiting for the first egg to crack. The humming increased in volume and tempo, an urgency to which Kevin responded, knowing that his time was all too limited if he was to join the ranks of the hopeful boys standing around the cracking eggs. But if he hurried down the ramp, he'd fall flat on his face. He could, of course, go flat on his rear end the way crawling children did. He sat down, sending a jarring stab of pain through his leg and up to the wound on the back of his head. Gritting his teeth and blinking away tears, Kevin scrabbled down the ramp. He had to wait a moment at the bottom to catch his breath. He got to one knee, the injured leg straight out in front of him. Somehow, he managed to push himself erect, though the room seemed about to tip over his ears. It wasn't far to the crooked stick, but it seemed an age before he had it in his hand. Then the humming stopped. Kevin cried out and began to hobble frantically across the cavern, out to the bowl of the ware. Never had the distance between living caverns and the hatching ground seemed so great. Never had the ware been so breathlessly silent. It was as if the multitude of people and dragons watching the hatching held every breath in suspense. Not even the wind muttered down the steep sides of the bowl. The only sounds to break the stillness were Kevin's ragged gasps and the thump-thud of his stick on the hard-packed ground. Sometimes he had to hop twice on his good leg to maintain his balance. Twice he fell into the sand and had to pull himself up on the stick, his white tunic no longer spotless. Once he jarred himself so badly he couldn't get up immediately. Then he heard the first exultation of the crowd, the oohs, the muted cheer, the susurrus of excited whispers. An egg had cracked, and the dragon had chosen his rider. Desperation increased Kevin's hobble. Would he never reach the arching mouth of the hatching ground? Another cheer and an excited spate of applause spurred Kevin to greater effort. If he didn't get there in moments, there'd be no unpaired hatchling left. Then he was actually staggering into the hatching ground, the sands hot on his bare feet. No one noticed his entrance or his halting progress, and Kevin could see nothing but the backs of the white-robed candidates, 70 of them ringing the area around the eggs. Then one side would surge forward or back, and there'd be a cheer. Another dragon had been impressed. Suddenly a large gap appeared in the white human wall, and Kevin had his first sight of the eggs. There didn't seem to be any left uncracked, and he could see the lucky boy standing beside wobble-legged dragons. He could hear the unmistakable plaintive crooning of hatchlings, and their squawks of protest as they'd fall awkwardly in the sand. Suddenly he wished that he hadn't left his bed, that he'd stayed away from the hatching ground. Now everyone would see his ignominious failure. So he scrambled as desperately to reach the shadowy walls of the hatching ground as he had struggled to cross the bowl. He mustn't be seen. He didn't notice, therefore, that the shifting group of boys remaining had begun to drift in his direction. The hard pace he had set himself and his cruel disappointment took their double toll of Kevin. He tripped and collapsed sobbing to the warm sands. He didn't see the consternation in the watching werefolk above the hatching ground, nor did he hear the excited whispers of speculation. He didn't know that the were-leader and were-woman had dropped to the arena and were making their way toward the knot of boys, slowly moving in the direction of the entrance. "Never seen anything like it," the were-leader was saying. "Only 39 riders chosen, and the bronze trying to leave the hatching ground without making impression." "A case in point of what I said last night," the were-woman replied. where a hatchling makes no choice because the right boy isn't there.
There's only Betterly, and Clast's young one missing, and there's a full wing of likely boys to choose from.
None acceptable, apparently. Where is the creature going? He's not heading for the entrance after all. Oh, what have we there, in the shadows? Kevin heard with dismay the sound of voices nearing him. He tried to burrow into the sand. The mere thought of how he would be teased and taunted now was unbearable. Don't worry. Please don't worry. The thought was urgent, but not his own. Someone kicked sand over Kevin and butted roughly against him. Go away! Leave me alone! He cried. Why? Was the injured-sounding question inserted into his mind? There was no voice, no tone, but the question was there, perfectly clear, in his head. Incredulous, Kevin lifted his head and stared into the glowing, jeweled eyes of a small bronze dragon. His wings were wet, the tips drooping in the sand, and he sagged in the middle on his unsteady legs, although he was making a great effort to keep erect. Kevin dragged himself to his knees, oblivious of the pain in his leg. He wasn't even aware that he was ringed by the boys passed over, while 31 pairs of resentful eyes watched him impress the dragon. The weremen looked on, amused and surprised at the draconic choice which could not be forced, could not be questioned, could not be changed. Why? Asked the dragon again. Don't you like me? His eyes whirled with anxiety, and his tone was so piteous that Kevin staggered forward and threw his arms around the dragon's neck, stroking his eye ridges, patting the damp, soft hide, opening the fragile-looking wings to dry them, and wordlessly assuring the hatchling over and over again that he was the most perfect, most beautiful, most beloved dragon in the were, in all the wares of Pern. What's his name, Kvahan? Asked Lessa, smiling warmly at the new dragon rider. Kvahan stared up at her for a long moment. Lessa would know as soon as he did. Lessa was the only person who could receive from all dragons, not only her own Ramoth. Then he gave her a radiant smile, recognizing the traditional shortening of his name that raised him forever to the rank of dragon rider. My name is Heth, the dragon thought mildly, then hiccuped in sudden urgency. I'm hungry. Dragons are born hungry, said Lessa, laughing. Flair, give the boy a hand. He can barely manage his own legs, much less a dragon's. Kvahan remembered his stick and drew himself up. We'll be just fine, thank you.
You may be the smallest dragon rider ever, young Kvahan, Flar said, but you're one of the bravest.
And Heth agreed. Pride and joy so leaped in both chests that Kvahan wondered if his heart would burst right out of his body. He looped an arm around Heth's neck, and the pair, the smallest dragon boy and the hatchling who wouldn't choose anybody else, walked out of the hatching ground, together forever.